What's up, guys? I'm GamerMDD3, and I'm here with a very good friend of mine. His name is Nick Sadler. He is a tech artist at Bioware. He's working on Dragon Age Inquisition. So say hello to all the beautiful people.
Hello, all you beautiful people.
Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be talking about not just Dragon Age Inquisition, but I'm going to be taking your guys' questions and talking about what Nick does.
During the week.
No, during the weekend. So, Nick. A lot of you provided a lot of questions, which is super awesome. But I have to say that I couldn't include all of them for obvious reasons. And a lot of the questions that were repeating, I just linked them together, or I also reorganized some and changed the wording on others. But it's pretty much your guys' questions. Okay, so let's get started. You ready, Nick?
Yes.
All right. So what does a tech artist do?
So, it kind of varies from company to company because, every company's got its own development culture and different teams with different team member strengths. And BioWare is my third company. And at each of the previous, there were tech artists that had marginally different roles. In some companies, it's like a case of a tech artist doing things like being a kind of bridge or a liaison to the art teams between code and art. So you will have things like the tools that the artists need, export plugins from the various programs that they use, like 3D Studio Max or Maya, that exports the artwork into a suitable format for whatever game engine they end up using. I've never had to know how to script in the past, so that's not something that I've been able to bring to this role. I mean, my primary focus is on the shaders and the materials. So I take other people's artwork and try to make it look as good as it possibly can beyond what they've already done.
When you say you take other people's artwork, do you mean like you take the concept art and then you do that?
Sometimes, I mean, when I started at BioWare, it was as an environment artist. So my early responsibilities were modeling and texturing, making sure that the materials are set up for best visual impact and making sure that they light as well as possible and making sure the materials are accurate.
I guess you touched a little bit upon it, but now you could go a little more in detail. Is what exactly do you do on Dragon Age?
When I first joined BioWare, which was 2012, 2.5 years ago now, it was just as a modeler, as an environmental artist. So then it was to do a system where we could do not only unique caves and lots of unique caves pretty quickly, but also cave systems that you could walk straight into, offer an exploration area without any kind of loading or delays. And then it became about making special case shaders for some of the more specialist aspects. And now it's more a kind of maintenance consistency role. And I'm getting into tech art workflows so that we can have consistency from as early in a project as possible.
What is the process you normally go through while creating the shaders? And for those of us that don't know what shaders actually mean, because I was thinking it was another thing, but it was like, oh no, it's not that. Could you explain a little bit what a shader is?
A few years ago, shaders were kind of very, well, again, depending on the engine a game was made in, shaders could be very, very complicated or something much more simple. Everyone's probably familiar with the notion of having texture maps and geometry, 3D geometry in a video game these days. And a shader basically allows you to control how a material behaves under certain lighting conditions. It's a set of instructions that manipulate a stack of textures that all inform the surface of a particular object how to behave. So it might be reflective, it might not be, it might glow. With more sophisticated shaders, we can have moving elements. You might have a shader on a solid object that looks like a test tube, but you can have clouds inside kind of churning, so it looks like it's full of an active substance or a cloudy liquid or something. Rain shaders, which is my personal favorite at the moment, and you can encourage a whole raft of behaviors depending on the surface to make it look like it's being rained on, or it's having, water is running down the side of it. So ultimately, to be a shader guy, you've got to be a fairly good problem solver. Mm-hmm. Someone comes to you, we need a material for X, and it needs to be set in Y environment with Z interactivity or whatever. So it's get the brief, then do your research, and then make sure you've got good high quality textures. And by high quality, I don't necessarily mean massive resolution, but stuff that adequately communicates what that substance is supposed to be to the player. And then you repeatedly bang your head against the monitor until the shader does exactly what you need it to do.
How do you go about getting references or source material for shaders?
You go outside and you take photographs of stuff. That's kind of, it's the quickest and easy way to get dependable primary source reference material. Secondary source, if it's a moving shader that you probably don't have access to, for a material that you don't have access to cheaply. YouTube's really, really good. Like some of the rainfall stuff that I was doing, you can't go out and take photos of or videos of rain falling in puddles if it's the middle of summer and bone dry. Or if it needs to be able to treat light in a particular way, somewhere someone on YouTube has taken a torch and they've run a torch over a rock so that you know how a rock surface is supposed to behave under light.
Because that there is a video out there of someone with a torch on you.
There's probably 2 or 3 million videos of people holding torches to
You've probably seen them all too.
Well, only 2.5 million of them.
Oh, okay.
You can kind of call on experience as well. You might find and this is a kind of common problem when you're looking at source material or reference material in preparation for making an asset in a game. There are lots of times where you think, I've found an image that looks like what I've already done. So you're trying to do something like, any kind of in-game asset, an object or something. To find something that retroactively supports the decision that you've made in creating something for a game or for anything, that's absolutely the wrong way to do it. One of the most important things that I learned at university was that you've got to allow the research to steer the decisions that you make. So if you're going to do, for instance, a shader effect of rain falling into a puddle, you don't find the one that supports your suspicion. You find 10, and then you find as many of those 10 that are alike in some way, because chances are that's a fair representation of what people expect to see. And you discard the fringe cases, and throwing them away, regardless of whether they support your emotional reaction to solving this problem, is one of the most difficult things to do, because it's like, this is how I want to impart my personality on this solution. But nobody gets it. So that's not good enough. You've got to go with what people expect to see at the expense of what you might consider a creative opportunity. So, for the rain, there was exactly that. I might have had a video that I took with my cell phone that paints light in a particular way, or it's a certain effect. Or I just might have had a mental image of what rainfall looks like falling into puddles. Mm-hmm. But when you actually look at the world and you discover that there's maths at play governing how far out from the raindrop that the rings, then that's what you've got to work with, because that's what people expect to see. Peer review is also a great thing, especially when you're doing real world stuff.
What program do you use when doing your work?
Shaders are done pretty much exclusively, for me certainly, because of my technical limitations. I can't yet code HLSL, which is shader language, so I can't think in terms of what the code lines are. So I use Frostbite's own shader editor, which is a node-based editor, same as Unreal or Unity.
Oh, cool. Okay. Going into it, did you know Dragon Age had such a huge and passionate following? And does that impact your work in any way?
Going into it, no, absolutely not. The games that I had come off, some of the games have had really passionate followings, but it might be 30 or 40 people. DA fans are a whole different species. I've learned over the last year, has it been? 18? Yeah, lovely bunch for the most part. Yes, it does absolutely affect how you work, because the biggest mistake you can make as a game developer is thinking that you can get away with stuff in front of the fans, and it's absolutely not the case. You've got to make sure that they can scrutinize, you can scrutinize every single pixel on the screen and allow them to go away from the experience knowing or feeling that every pixel was in the right place and that it's been a satisfying game experience, but also the visuals haven't snapped them out of the immersion. So yeah, it makes a hell of a difference.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. When you first started the project, what kind of research did you do to get a feel for the series and the world?
Preparing the game stuff, I was given the brief to do this cave system. Looked at how other games had kind of covered the notion of doing caves and interior, subterranean, naturally occurring subterranean spaces. Half-Life 2, I think in episode 2, had a solution for doing cave stuff. But beyond that, it was more an investigation into how popular media featured caves. At the time, Prometheus had just come out, so I was kind of keen to see how similar processes. Looked at a little older stuff, Rage of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, see how they had treated caves.
Do you remember the bugs from Temple of Doom?
Yeah, I remember the bugs from Temple.
Yeah, who doesn't remember the bugs?
I can't see those things bothered me as much as...
really?
Bits. Yeah.
When you could hear...
He says as he's kind of itching.
When you could hear bugs, that's not good.
Yeah, well, yeah. Try to look for naturally occurring aspects of how caves are formed that would lend themselves to what we wanted to achieve in the game, so that nothing looked contrived, that nothing that isn't sensible,
Yeah. Okay, someone is asking, personally, I'm currently going to Full Sail University to obtain my bachelor's in this field. What is the next step in getting your foot in the door of this career?
If they're in first year, second year, or even the third year of their degree, or fourth if it's a 4-year thing, be contacting companies right now and build up a dialogue with different companies. When I graduated and I was looking to get into the industry for the first time, I was kind of fortunate that I lived somewhere where there were 5 to 10 really well-established games development companies, which lived within an hour's drive from where I used to live. Build up contacts, send emails out, make sure that you're on their radar, because getting a job as a junior, it's not just about having a good portfolio or, university experience or even work experience. You've kind of got to make sure that a company is hiring or looking to hire juniors and trainees at that point. If they're in mid-flight on a project and they may be at headcount block and they can't make any new hires, regardless of seniority, you've got no chance. I think one of the important things as well looking for work is humility. One of the things that university does really well, it kind of spits you out into the corporate world thinking that you know everything. So you've got to be comfortable with starting on the bottom rung and not going in thinking that you're going to reinvent the video game as we know it.
Yeah.
Or come up with a mechanism through the university by which you can invite them to come to see you. When I finished, we organised an exhibition of the year's work, the master's course's work, and we invited art directors and art staff from quite a few local companies. And that was the main route of, I think it was more than half of the course actually got work within 2 months of finishing the MA, because art directors that came to that exhibition, they actually headhunted those people and said, come and work for us. You're clearly good. You're going to be very cheap. So just, we want to have a chat. Bring your portfolio over.
It's probably best not to, because I've seen this a lot with my subscribers that are actually going into the field, that they tend to limit themselves to just maybe applying to so-and-so company because they made so-and-so game. But I think maybe getting your foot into the door, that's probably not the best thing to do, to limit yourself like that.
The game playing experience is absolutely nothing like the game's development experience. To go to a company because you like playing their games doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do well in that company's culture. People are diverse, and different people gel with different teams or work better under different leads with different styles. There are just so many unknowns that can be thrown into the gears of thinking like that. I didn't have an aversion to working on WipEout or Formula One. I wanted to work on games. I wanted to become a good games developer. So, when Sony knocked, you answer.
Yeah.
You've got to be dynamic, because chances of you working on the game you think you want to work on are slim to none.
Yeah.
unless you're exceptional and particularly driven.
Or maybe eventually,
Yeah,
with the experience.
exactly. But you know, through conversations with people like yourself, it's got me thinking about, you know, would I like to go to the company that is making the game that I'm enjoying playing right now?
Yeah.
Um, I mean, on one hand, I'm enjoying playing our game hugely, um, but there are a completely different style of games that I play in my spare time anyway. The more kind of quick, faster paced, arcadey stuff. Could I see myself working at those companies? Probably not. I probably wouldn't want to. I'd probably want to enjoy the games as a gamer, but you know, I like to think that I'm working close to the sharp end of art tech right now,
Yeah.
and something else that you can't spot, you can't guess in this industry is having colleagues that you actually enjoy spending time with, and a
Yeah.
team that you get really good chemistry with. And the team that we've got right now is epic. I mean, you just don't give it up. You just don't.
Yeah.
That's key to a successful development experience, as well as having strong leadership and all of the other conveniently brilliant
Yeah.
stuff like
Like
strong,
awesome fans.
also strong IP, good tools. Just to have a team that you trust and everywhere everyone knows what each other's capable of, and you can depend on them to do certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't give that up. The grass isn't ever greener.
Do you prefer working on the tech of a game, or would you prefer working more on the traditional drawing side, like the concept art?
When I was hired by Sony, it was as a junior developer generally, but concept art was the first thing that I was actually asked to do for a project.
Oh, cool.
And it's well, it wasn't anything special at the time. It was before the here we go. In my day, it was before the kind of the revolution in digital painting that's happened over the last 10 years. So when I
Oh,
was
right.
the concept art gods were people like, you know, Feng Zhu's early stuff and Doug Chang, and it was all markers and fine liners and
Yeah.
marker paper and stuff. But that was that chapter, and you inevitably move on to different things. And what's most important for me right now is to be, is to try to be dynamic to the task and to stay useful on a project. So, do I prefer the traditional stuff or the technical stuff? Right now, prefer the technical stuff because that's what the project needed.
Yeah.
That's that's more important to me.
What are the challenges in creating an engaging environment in a racing game?
So, it depends very much on the racing game, but at the core of everything is consistent visuals or visual consistency, whichever. If it's Formula One, it's all very heavily licensed and it's all real world, so you've got to be as accurate as possible. In my position on Formula One, which was tarmac guy, you've got to make sure that all of the road markings are exactly where the drivers on those courses on those tracks would expect to actually find them. So you get a street track, and a very famous street track like Monte Carlo. Everything's got to be in the right place. Otherwise, people will be saying, "Oh, the PS is not powerful enough to support manhole covers and stuff like this." But then you go on to something like WipEout, where there's a really rich legacy of a creative effort rather than a realistic approach.
Because it's like futuristic, right?
Very, very much so. What was important to me was to, again, look at the previous titles, look at the kind of the influence from other games or movies or whatever. For me, looking at those influences, it tells me what to steer away from, rather than to say F-Zero did that, so let's do that.
Yeah.
It was F-Zero solved this problem like this, but the problem was X, Y, and Z, so let's take the problem and solve it how we need it solved, rather than steal someone else's solution. But again, at the core of it all is visual consistency. Actually, what was most important to me on Wipeout HD was to make because again, I was track guy, it was to make the actual trenches that you race in Wipeout, was to make each one unique. Because until then, Wipeout games had pretty much the same texture, tinted a different color for its tracks. So I wanted to make them starkly visually different. So customizing each track surface was a really convenient way to, enhance that notion. and the track covers the bottom 1/3 of the screen, so it's front and center, and people can analyze it. And
Oh, wow.
as long as you're getting the design vocabulary right and making sure that they can easily distinguish the walls from the floor, so that they don't bang into it, and they can see what direction they're supposed to be going in. They can see the curve on the horizon nice and early.
Yeah.
Yeah, I won't say it's carte blanche, but there's a lot of creative wiggle room, definitely.
You hinted a little bit about this earlier, but what games do you like to play on your downtime?
So last night it was Ridge Racer 5, because
Really?
I've been kind of talking up Ridge Racer 5 to quite a few people, yourself included,
Yeah.
for the last 6 months. I kind of wish I had a big cathode ray TV so that I could play it properly, but still a great game. Other than the visuals, it really does stand up after however long it's been, 13 years since it came out. Played through Quake 1 and Quake 2, had a little go at Quake 3. It's very difficult, so I left that alone. Strider,
Ah, yeah.
it's a classic. The new remake, it's just gorgeous. Ticks all the boxes. Cave Story. Ah,
Oh, I can't play that one.
I love Cave Story so much. And when you spend however many thousands of dollars on your PC, that would be the first game that you get.
Okay.
Four grand's worth of PC to play a $5 game. Yeah, that's what you should do. Velocity 2, playing that a little bit recently. That's pretty good.
On the PS4, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, just a kind of quick fix arcadey stuff. Love it. Housemarque games, love those. Super Stardust and Dead Nation and Resogun. Yeah, love it. Love it.
So I'm trying to get him into story-driven games. So let him know what good story-driven games he could play. 'Cause I
Yeah.
think you would do good with the BioShocks.
Bioshocks.
Yeah. Bioshock 1, no Bioshock 2, Bioshock Infinite.
Okay,
I think you'd like Bioshock Infinite because it's fast. It's got that fast pace that you like.
cool. All right. Should set the bar nice and high. So yeah, if 2,500 people say, or if 2,500 people like this comment, then
Do it.
do it.
Are there any games throughout gaming history that you would say I would have loved to work on that game?
When I got into the industry, which is like 11 years ago, 11 years ago tomorrow, weirdly.
Really?
Yeah, October the
Aw.
13th.
What are you gonna do?
Probably not tell anybody.
Well, a little too late now.
It's kind of strange because a lot of the people that I work with at Bioware, they've been in the industry since it started, so 11 years is nothing.
Wow.
I mean, my lead's been in the industry for like 20 years, and Neil's been in the industry for nearly 30 years. So, yeah, 11 years is but a drop in that kind of ocean. So, yeah, I'd probably keep it to myself.
You should at least have some fried tempura ice cream.
Oh, no.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, that's totally right. Yeah, that's exactly. So, yeah,
All right. Cool.
ice cream tempura with a candle.
Oh.
13,
Yes.
11 candles. Anyhow, where the hell were we? When I got into the industry, Unreal Tournament was kind of right on the tip of my brain. So yeah, I would have liked to have worked on Unreal Tournament 2003 when that was in development, because taking higher spec PCs and basically reinventing the first Unreal Tournament with more lush graphics and better sound and nicer visual effects and faster gameplay. Yeah, I kind of would have liked to be part of that.
Do you get to play the game Dragon Age Inquisition now like the writers do?
Yes.
And the QA team? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us about it? No, I'm just kidding. You know, the other part to this question was, and is it awesome?
And it is awesome.
And it is awesome.
It's got me into it. So I'll say that much. It's got me compelled.
And that's a big deal for you to be into this kind of this type of game, I see.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's not a big deal, you know. There are water shortages around the world. That's a big deal. Me getting into that.
That's not what I mean. Oh, God. This isn't like breaking news. Do you find it more interesting to work on real-world environments, fantasy environments or futuristic environments?
They ultimately boil down to the same problems. And I'm kind of in a fortunate position where I can fairly honestly say that I've worked on all three. Formula One, you had to be quite slavish to the environments looking really convincingly realistic. WipEout was fairly futuristic. So there was that kind of fairly stereotyped, cliched now, hard-edged modeling and very, confident lines. And then the fantasy environment, I think the most important thing, especially from the, working on the art, working on the development floor, is to keep your artwork as flexible as possible. Someone will say, usually an art lead or an art director, I'd like it a little bit more like this and a little bit less like that. So if you can make that change either really quickly or, where I've had the pleasure of being able to do on shader side is actually make those changes instantly while the art director is actually sat there.
Oh, cool.
Said, I'd like that roof made out of copper instead of shingle. And they said, okay. A couple of clicks later, and we've got like a copper roof with verdigris rust kind of dripping down it, and it looks far more eye-catching and a lot more sophisticated, a bit more next-gen. And to be able to make those changes almost in real time, it makes the decision-making process for me easier and for them an awful lot more convenient. If you can get it done to your art director's satisfaction.
That's what's meant, yeah. How hard is it to design something knowing there may be an effect that destroys it?
So, I worked on a Motorstorm game called Motorstorm Apocalypse. And the notion of that was, it was basically a city that was hit by an earthquake. And that was kind of my first leadership. And our little team was responsible for the destruction visual effects. If we have a destructible barrel or a crate or anything, you can't just take a regular model that would be a static prop and just apply some kind of procedural effect. You've got to make sure that it's rigged to explode right, it's rigged to splinter right.
I see.
The visual effects aren't going to be filling the screen and making the frame rate drop. You've got to make sure that it's suited to purpose.
So it's made for that. The things that blow up, the things that burn down, those are made for that.
Yes. And that's the difficulty with doing 100% persistent destruction in video games, because you've got to guarantee that everything is going to be destroyed in a kind of semi-predictable way. Yeah. It's not in an emergent way, it's in a dynamic way. And you've got to make sure that when you destroy wall A, it doesn't collapse in such a way that you can no longer navigate the path. On Motorstorm, I approached that problem once, and it was a far, far bigger task than I think anyone on the team could have imagined at the beginning of the project.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Making Varric's chest hair glisten in the sun. Oh my god. I know.
That wasn't me. So, although I did make sure his chest hair was consistent with